Hello everyone, TLSG here, back again with another Daily Marvel Snap video. So today we have an accessible list, but just because it's an accessible list doesn't mean it's not incredibly strong and incredibly viable into the current meta that we have. And so I like to challenge myself to use cards that don't necessarily require a season pass, that don't require a deep collection, so Series 5, Series 4. Those cards are really fun to experiment with and play around with, but I know the majority of players aren't going to have access to most of those cards. And so can you still be incredibly efficient? Can you be competitive in Marvel Snap without those resources? And I think the answer is yes. It's just a matter of figuring out what the meta is and building a deck to do well into that consistently. And so that is where we landed on today's deck. Today's deck is a hybrid between a control deck, so a Spider-Man Professor X lock deck, a low-range deck that runs like the Kitty Pryde and Angela package, and then also a counter deck that wants to run the Enchantress and Shang Chi. And so all three of these, how do you mash them together incredibly well? Well, with the consistency driver that is Chavez, we can guarantee that we have those tools almost every single game to find ways to win, no matter what kind of deck the opponent's running. A Galactus, we laugh at Galactus, because with Galactus, we have things like Spider-Man and Professor X, so that if they do a turn 4, a turn 5, Galactus line, we can make sure that we block them out of any further follow-up on that final turn. If they do turn 6, then we can lock in one lane with Professor X. They can't do things like Wolverine or Nimrod into those locations, and it becomes much more difficult for them to win with that in mind. If we're facing things like control builds, I don't know, high evolutionary control, which is like the king. He is incredibly dominant right now in that control shell. Then we have things like counterlock. We don't run Storm in this version for a very specific reason. In a control lockdown heavy meta, if two lanes are locked in with Storm, High Evolutionary is going to win every single time because they have the ability to impact those lanes so drastically every single turn that they don't necessarily care if they're completely locked out of the location, with things like Cyclops, Nebula, Sunspot, Misty Knight on the board to continue buffing their cards even if they're not actually playing cards. And so if two lanes are locked down, they Spider-Man or Professor X lock the last one, then you're going to lose. And so if you get the whiff that maybe they're a control heavy build, then you are then fighting to lock them out of one of the additional two locations with your Spider-Man or Professor X, and then slamming some counterplays into that last remaining location. Whether that be a Gamora and a Miles Morales, a Kitty Pryde and a Gamora, a Shang Chi, and some of your other cheaper resources, you have several ways to make those efficient plays happen. And this is very similar for everything else, like Lockjaw rotation can be difficult if they're running the version that goes wide. Sometimes decks that go wide can be difficult to match into if you're running into a lot of bounce decks. Bounce is in a great spot right now with how much power potential it has, but you can lock them out of locations with Spider-Man and Professor X, and then all of a sudden they're limited to two locations, and you can much more easily place things like a Shang Chi or have counterplays in place like an Angela that's already been buffed up with your Kitty Pryde, and then you can match their power in one lane even if you wouldn't normally be able to match it in all three locations. And through my testing, I've maintained a 75% win rate, which it is a rather low sample size. Even with that in mind, 75% win rate against some pretty heavy hitters is phenomenal. I normally hover around 60 if it's a really good deck, around 65. If it's an incredible deck, maybe close to 70 over a smaller or mid-range sample size. But this one seems like it has answers to pretty much everything that's common right now, and that feels phenomenal. And so with the brief deck explanation out of the way, we're going to go ahead and quickly jump over into a couple of games. Thank you guys for being here as always. I hope that you guys enjoy. Let's go ahead and jump over into a couple of games. All right, first up we have our friend. The first location is Sinister London. One of the best things about Sinister London is the double Spider-Man lock, for a control deck that is. Double Spider-Man lock, the double Professor X lock, and just the ability you have to really control that almost entire board. Now, the first card that they play is a double Nova. So this could be a Sera tech deck. I've been seeing an awful lot of Sera tech decks to start the season for some reason. It can be big. But for me, the snap lines for a Sera tech deck are so incredibly difficult to read that it's almost not worth it. It's so difficult. Like it's like I'm doing mental gymnastics every single game, and sometimes that's gonna just end in a 1 cube win. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to prioritize playing our Kitty Pryde now. Shuri's Lab is one of those locations that whenever you can get Shuri's Lab with a Kitty Pryde, it's just going to make the rest of the game that much easier. Like, honestly, we almost don't even want to play anything else just to make sure that we don't grab initiative so that they can't use a Killmonger to destroy our Kitty Pryde. Like, that is how impactful this location can be. And I think that's what we're going to do. We're not going to draw on this next turn. Intentionally not going to draw on this next turn. They do change the middle location, which is good. That's a good heads up play. But they're running like the Sera tech that also runs the Hit Monkey. And so how can we outscale that? I think there's a couple of ways we can do it. Right now, we still don't have initiative, which is fantastic. We can do something like Spider-Man into Shuri's Lab into a Kitty Pryde that we will duplicate. So that's going to bring us back up to 6. Pull 1 back in will be 7. We can play both of them on the last turn. We still don't have initiative. That way we can grab the lead in either of these two locations. I think 22 power should be fine. I think it should be plenty to be able to find a way to win out of these two locations. And then the other one's going to be 44, which is going to be hands down incredibly easy to face off against. They do use the Killmonger because they realize they're not going to be able to grab initiative back. They play their second Hit Monkey, which is still not going to be huge, but they get an additional one back into their hand at 4 power. But we're going to lock them out of Shuri's Lab. They're not going to be able to play for that location. Then we just have to come down and win one other lane. And so we have 2 20+ power Kitty Prydes. Let's do the 22 power one in Shuri's Lab just to make sure we send that one home. And then the other one would be in either of these two lanes. Finding a way for them to come over the top of that is going to be next to impossible. So when you're running something like Kitty Pryde and you know the opponent has a Killmonger, controlling your initiative, controlling who has priority going into that next turn or each turn of the game is so crucial and so critical in being able to navigate that and make sure that you have that resource on the last turn of the game. So we will go ahead and take the 1 cube retreat. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. I don't know how they do these names, but I think that's Jamal with a whole bunch of like cool little text underneath it. Super interesting. Either way, we have Kitty Pryde starting off. We do have the Spider-Man into Professor X tandem duo if we want to end up using it. I don't know that we do, so that we can continue prioritizing our Kitty Pryde. Now they do a Yondu, which it doesn't matter what Yondu hits here. Like no matter what he hits, we have our 2 lockdown tools. So if we anticipate that they're playing a Galactus, we know that we have a way. We know that we have a way to lock them down whenever that comes onto the board. I'm going to go ahead and play for the Raft for now. We don't know what else they're running besides Yondu. I assume that it is a Galactus deck. Every time I see Sokovia, so Sokovia gets rid of our Spider-Man, but it gets rid of their Electro. Being one of their ramp tools, one of the ramp components, now they are just stuck with Wave to get their Galactus out onto the board early. And so we're going to go ahead and snap into it because right now, that's not great for them. That is not a great sign. And if they don't have another ramp component, if they do stick this one out, next turn we will be able to fill up the Raft. Maybe. We might not be able to. Depends on what we draw into here. Okay, yeah, we can fill up the Raft. It was a little bit touch and go. We're going to use the players. We don't mind if Galactus goes off. And so we do end up getting the retreat. I'm guessing they didn't draw into their other cards. We will go ahead and take the 2 cube retreat. Let's jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Homage Waffle. And I played against Homage Waffle earlier. I think they were running Galactus. They were, because they got it. They played Wave on 3 into an Atelan location, which shuffled their cards in, and then they still got Galactus off on 4. And I was fuming. They did end up retreating because I guess they didn't have what they needed for the rest of the game. But I was fuming. We do get the cool Kitty Pryde and Angela tech or combo here. We're also not that afraid of Galactus. So if you're seeing a lot of Galactus, Spider-Man and Professor X are fantastic into those decks. Let's go ahead and do our Daredevil. From there, we can do Angela plus Kitty Pryde over and over and over and over again until Angela just is huge. Our Kitty Pryde gets buffed up decently as well, and we do have our Daredevil to get the read now. Something like the Nightcrawler is also decent to buff up the Angela. We can play it, move it out. We can grab a card with Polaris. So if we're looking to counter a Galactus play, that's fantastic. They play Electro. Please let it stick in the Danger Room. It does. Beautiful. So this turn they can do a Doc Ock. Ew, that's actually pretty scary. We don't know what lane they're going to play it into. I'm just going to skip here. Like, I'm very confident that Doc Ock comes down here, but we need Professor X. We need Professor X for the Galactus turn. And so I'm going to skip here and hope that their Doc Ock does not pull Professor X. Wait, Carnage. What? We skipped and we didn't need to. Oh, we got absolutely just bombarded and oh no, that's so awful. All right, so the Galactus does come down. I'm guessing they did not have a Doc Ock, and that's one of those big consistency drivers for this deck is the Doc Ock play. And so we have several ways to deal with this turn. We have the Spider-Man, we have the Professor X, which we'll make sure that we can't play next turn as well. But if they have something like a Jeff, maybe there's a scenario where they come out on top. Do we think we can snap and them not retreat? I think we snap and they retreat. But I would also just not enjoy myself if we did not snap here. So we're gonna go ahead and snap. Because we know next turn we're going to lock it down. We have the win coming in next turn. Maybe by taking so long on that turn, we entice them into thinking that we're just bluffing. Let's lock this in, see if they stick it out. They do. They do stick it out. The reverse, the Uno reverse for the Galactus play with the Spider-Man coming down, and then the retreat immediately following, which is something that you do against Galactus, not necessarily something you do very often as Galactus. And so once again, the menace that is Spider-Man comes in to save the day. We will take the 2 cubes. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Ghost Shoe. The first location is Mindscape. Not the best location for us, because a lot of times our hand is going to be very, very full. But it's also not the worst. We have our 2 lockdown tools. So we have Spider-Man, we have Professor X, we have our Kitty Pryde early. We have a Mind Stone, so they could change Mindscape pretty easily at some point during the game. I think we're going to do Angela. We're going to continue buffing up Mojo World. We might be able to steal this one away with like a Spider-Man on 5 if they don't have enough cards there. Maybe we can steal this one away by locking them out before they have enough cards in the location. We'll see, depending on how the rest of this goes. Ooh. Cloning Vats is interesting. And we could do Polaris a couple of times here. Polaris to move Mind Stone, Polaris to move Soul Stone, and they get really close to being capped out really quickly. Unless they have a Killmonger. We don't know. I'm gonna go Polaris though. I like the idea of getting this lane close to being capped out. I do go with Time Stone and Space Stone here. I'm curious what they were pushing for. Maybe a Professor X lock in the Cloning Vats into a Professor X lock naturally on 5 in another lane. Just in case they go Professor X lock here. I'm going to go Miles Morales plus Kitty Pryde. They could Professor X lock the Mindscape location if they assumed we weren't playing for it, but that gives us a really unique ability to lock them out of Mindscape entirely. They do their Time Stone, they now do Killmonger, so they clear up a lot of space. Unfortunately, it's going to be very hard to go up against, especially knowing that they may already have like a death in their hand somewhere. So we're going to go with a Spider-Man lock into Mojo World to hopefully win Mojo World, and then we just have to focus on one of the other 2. We are going to send them some really good resources. We have the Gamora, we have the Polaris, so they could actually pull our Angela out of the Mojo World location, potentially. All right. They could also Reality Stone the Mindscape location. They haven't played the Reality Stone yet, so that's still in play. With how many cards they've drawn, that's still a very viable option. And if so, Spider-Man's pretty good for us in Mojo World. It still comes down to winning just one additional location. We could do Gamora plus Kitty Pryde, trying to outpower whatever they play. Okay, so they come down with 2 cards into the Mindscape. One is Reality Stone, one is something else, I imagine. What is... Okay, so the Death. And the... Ooh, the Death and the Spider-Man is interesting. So we do give them Gamora. So that's an easy 12 power in one of these lanes. We have initiative in these 2. We can't do something like a Shang Chi. And we could go 15 power here. 15 power is not terrible. So it's a 20 total power. Their Gamora would be 12. They would have to have another 8 for 1 cost. They didn't duplicate their death in the cloning vats, which is kind of surprising, honestly, for how free it would have been over. Oh, they would have sent it back our way. That's why. I think we go with this, and I think we have a pretty solid shot. Let's go for it. We do get the retreat. Courtesy of our Spider-Man. All right. Next up, we have Dr. Secret, and the first location is the cloning vats. We do have our Kitty Pryde starting off, which is a big resource for us. The Nexus is also a big resource, or a big location for us, with something like Professor X, with something like Spider-Man, to be able to restrict them from playing into that lane. Now they have a lizard that they played into the cloning vats. That tells me they probably either have like Sauron, Enchantress, or a Luke Cage, and so they're not worried about the negative downside to this card, is what I imagine. That's what I imagine in my head anyways. All right, I am going to play Nightcrawler into the cloning vats. And the reasoning for that is if we go with a Professor X lock into the Nexus on turn 5, I want to have a way to maneuver and move power into that lane to help support us there. And so we do get Daredevil. So let's go ahead and do Daredevil. We're going to do Kitty Pryde, and then we're just going to do the Nightcrawler outright, regular into the Nexus location. Now the Daredevil will give us a very specific, very good read of if, and then there comes the Enchantress. So that is alongside the read that we had, that they didn't care that the Lizard could potentially get negatively afflicted with power if we capped out that lane, and so they had the Enchantress come down. Daredevil is going to give us a very precise read of if we can lock the middle location in with Professor X or not. And so how much do they put here? They put Sera, so it's only 4 power. And so I'm going to go ahead and move our Nightcrawler. We're going to drop Professor X here. And then from there, we can do something like Angela, Kitty Pryde, Miles. We're going to have a notable advantage in the Nexus location comparative to what they have. And so I think they probably have like a Shang Chi, a Killmonger. This could be, ooh, we may have hurt ourselves. This could be the Toxic Sera. So they could have Hazmat. Well, a Wong and a Hazmat would be wild. Oh, that might get us. I'm not going to snap into this for that specific reason. A Hazmat could absolutely just ruin us. We're going to stick it out. We have the Kitty Pryde that could be inflicted by a Killmonger. I'm hoping that the Angela plus Miles is enough. I don't know. If this is the Hazmat build, we could lose here. Very, very well could lose. Toxic Sera list could come in so heavy-handed. Scarlet Witch changes the cloning vats. So far, so good. The Lizard, okay. The Sentinel, okay. No Hazmat, no Luke Cage for him. The Killmonger, okay. And so that does take out our Kitty Pryde, but with the extra leap, the extra spacing that we have in the Nexus, we are able to hold down the Eternity range with the Angela and the Miles Morales. And so what could have been very, very scary, fortunately for us, we were able to hold down. We will take the 4 cubes, and let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have I Am Troop. The first location is the Vault. They play a Yondu. Okay, so if this is another Galactus, we are enjoying the plethora of Galactus right now. If it's just a destruction deck, which we've seen a marked increase in destroy decks, surprisingly. Like, they're just as impactful as they were before. They're never incredibly broken or potent. They're also never incredibly terrible either. And so the Yondu Electro, yeah, we do see the Electro. We're going to use Polaris to pull the Yondu out of this location. Now their only lane to play Galactus would be into the Vibranium Mines. And so where do they play their Dock Off? That is my biggest concern here. Actually, you know what? We're not concerned at all. They're going to Dock Off into the Vault. They have to, right? We are taking an educated guess. If I was them and I had a Dock Ock, I would play it into the more empty lane, so aka the Vault. And we want to make sure, as countering a Galactus line, I want to make sure that they cannot get both of our lockdown tools, our Spider-Man and our Professor X. And so I'm going to play into the vault, assume that the Doc Ock is coming there. We're only going to leave one space. We're not going to leave this up to chance, not going to leave it up to whoa. The Shuri is surely not what I was anticipating here. This is going to be a Nimrod into the vault. That's scary. How do we... Definitely the less common of the two here. How do we beat a turn 6? I was anticipating the normal Galactus into like a Spider-Man, a Null, a Death. We have that hands down. They do use Nimrod here, this turn. That's going to be 10 power in this lane. It brings them up to 14. We can't beat 14 here. Also can't beat a big shift in this lane either. I'm going to go with the Professor X lock into the Vibranium Mines. If they just go with a big power play into the into the middle of Vibranium Mines, if they go with a big power play into either of the other two big Vibranium Mines, then they may be able to just win the vault. We're not going to be ahead in the vault. So if they do something other than Destroyer, if they do Destroyer, they're going to ruin this lane and it's going to send the Nimrod over here. And we're fine in the left lane. They also can't reach into the middle location. So Galactus is null and void. Let's do this. 9, 10, 11. I think this beats any play that they could do. Destroyer, fine. Galactus, they can't do it. Death, they can't do it. They can't do a double destruction, so they can't do a Carnage plus something over here. And so I think we get the retreat here. We do. We force the retreat. Turn 6 had me on my heels a little bit. It is overall less consistent, but it has more ways to play around the opponent's counterplay, which makes it a little bit scarier when you don't see it all that often. We will take the 1 cube. Let's go ahead and jump over into the next one. All right, next up we have Cool Bird. The first location is the big house. We should have no problem there unless it's a bounce deck. If it's a bounce deck, then we will just abandon that location. We'll look to lock down one of the other two, and then we look to win the other one with just our higher power plays. So they have a sunspot to start, so they're going to soak. This could still be high evolutionary. It could be just a number of decks that we have to look out for. I'm going to go ahead and play our Kitty Pryde into mid. No particular reason. I don't think this is a clog deck. I don't think this is a junk deck. I don't think they have a Snow Guard to re-trigger the Savage Lands, which would be so scary, but so impactful at the same time. They do use armor into the big house, so we can't destroy that one. Whoa. And then the kiln comes down into the right lane, just obliterating us. So how do we win this one? Winning the big house becomes tough. I also think winning a kiln becomes very, very difficult as well. I'm going to use Polaris into the middle location. Hope that it pulls their armor. We can give up the big house. We can get that much closer to winning the Savage Land. And we'll go from there. It does pull their armor, and so we could lean in on the last turn with like a Gamora. They do skip and soak with their Sunspot, and so we could try to like psych them out and snap here, making them think that we have a Killmonger. But I think for right now, we're just going to flood in this kiln location. I mean, this is only 7 power, which is going to be an issue. They skipped. They could do a She-Hulk here, and that's going to be 9, and we're not going to be able to compete against that 9 power. On turn 5, we can Spider-Man into the Savage Land if they don't play for that location, and then it comes down to like the big house. But if they skip and soak, there's not anything that we can do. They do split their power. They storm the big house location, which I think is okay, honestly. They can win this left lane. We will win the kiln location, and then we can lock them out of the Savage Land. The Daredevil is going to give us the guaranteed read, but I think we're pretty confident, pretty comfortable here. Because they could be leaning on like a Doctor Doom. A lot of people in a high evolutionary version of a control have picked up Doctor Doom. However, locking down 2 locations with control heavy builds being as common as they are is so incredibly optimistic that it's hard to consistently, like, if I'm running Storm and I know that another lane is locked down, unless I can guarantee that I'm going to lock the opponent out of the board entirely, it is so scary to lock out a second location because Professor X and Spider-Man are so common right now. But honestly, with everything that we had played, it does. I mean, it just kind of looks like a Stature Hawk deck, honestly, until the Daredevil. So let's Professor X lock here. That brings us to 10. Even if they have a Jeff, they can't win here. They can't win here. Do we snap into this? Yeah, let's go ahead and snap into it. You know that they're going to retreat next turn regardless. And so we are going to snap, see if maybe we can entice them into giving us one additional cube. They do make the correct call of retreating. Very good heads up play, Cool Bird. We will take the 1 cube. Let's go ahead and jump over into, let's say 1 more. Next up, we have Squirrel. You can read the name if you want, but next up, we have Squirrel. The first location is Death's Domain. We can do a Professor X there. We get a little bit of value. We also have our Nightcrawler that can just move over there, which is beautiful for us. I'm going to start with Angela, just until we get a read on or an idea for what the opponent's playing. They could be running a movement deck, which Professor X will completely derail. The Loot Cage starting off is a little bit scary. It's either a High Evolutionary, could be a Cerebro 2, that wants to make sure that they are unbothered by any other type of play. Honestly, here we have everything we need, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate. 4, 5, 6. We won't draw next turn. That's perfectly fine. We're okay with that. We will have the Angelas that are tandem stacked in the cloning vats. We will have a Kitty Pryde that we'll have 2 Kitty Prydes that we can use to buff all of our Angelas up. They do use a Cyclops. Oof, that's very scary, because now they can negatively afflict us every single turn by skipping and floating. So far, they've only skipped and floated on the first turn, though, which I think is going to be important to note. Camartage is also very difficult for us to do anything into because of things like Wasp. Things like Wasp are going to double afflict, and it's just Wasp thing are just going to be so scary to deal with. And although I don't think we have a chance in Camartage, I am going to play there for now. Next turn, I plan to do like a Nightcrawler move into a Professor X in Death's Domain, and then we're looking to win 1 additional lane from there. They can Spider-Man lock us out of 1 location. Most of these decks have ended up cutting Professor X just because you can't skip and soak and float to enable your bigger last turn plays, and so that is where I hope that we benefit here. We don't have Daredevil on the board. We draw it a touch too late. I think that's fine. I don't think we need the Daredevil play. And so they can Spider-Man lock us out of 1 location. They didn't skip and soak last turn either, so Cyclops didn't trigger. And so maybe they're not going with the version that wants to control the board state. Maybe they're not going to Spider-Man lock us. Or maybe they're just newer to the High Evolutionary line and they are maybe unfortunately did not skip and soak or think to skip and soak. The thing does come down in Camartage, and so that's going to trigger 6 times. And so what was a beautiful Angela is now a shell of her former self. The double Cyclops trigger here is so brutal as well. It's so tough to beat. And we can't Shang Chi either of those. We wouldn't be able to Enchantress it even if we wanted to. Just such a powerful like mid-range card that can technically get over that 9 power range by afflicting the opponent's cards, but it's safe from Enchantress and from Shang Chi. So how do we win from here, though? I think the way that we win is this. I think the draw of them doing the Evolved Hulk is too big. I think it's too great. Maybe they do like a Doctor Doom here. Maybe. I'm going to leverage the fact that I think they're going to be greedy. I think they're going to go with something big. It could come back to bite us, but we're going to risk it. We're going to stick it out. What do they play? They play the Abomination. We played our big card in the wrong lane. The Abomination comes down. The Cyclops comes down. They do have, I think, the additional energy to skip and soak, so their Cyclops is going to negatively afflict us in both locations, right? Wait, do we win by 1? We win by 1. Oh my gosh. Wow. Not what I would call a comfy win, but it was a win. We will take it. Let's go ahead, and that is where we're going to end the video, you guys. That is a lot of negative ability. That is a lot of affliction, and we were able to hold up against most of those and other decks like Destruction, Galactus. It makes us giggle every single time because the odds of us having one of our lockdown tools with the Chavez giving us that consistency driver is so great. And so for a deck that doesn't require anything that is outside of Series 3, this is an incredibly consistent and potent deck that has answers to a lot of common decks right now. So I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give it a like and a comment down below. As always, this has been TLSG. Later, guys.